If you were born in Victorian Britain, the odds of your breakfast being a silver-plated tea service with hot scones, or a stale potato with the dirt still clinging to it, depended entirely on the class lottery you never got to buy a ticket for. You might be the well-fed child in a sunlit nursery, sponge cake in hand, corrected in French by your nanny. Or you might be the barefoot child scooping horse dung off the cobbles for fuel before your first sip of water. Perhaps you're the gentleman spending more on one dinner party than it would cost to feed an entire slum for a month, while a woman across the city shares a damp one-room flat with 9 others and a single bucket for a toilet. Most of you just lurk here like unannounced Victorian callers. Subscribe. At least then I'll know you meant to show up. And while you're here, what time is it where you are? We've got a very long Victorian day ahead. You open your eyes. The day begins. Though your day depends entirely on which side of Victorian London you happen to exist in. First, the West End version of you. You are horizontal, beneath a quilted counterpane that cost more than an East End family earns in a year. The curtains are drawn against the pale London light, heavy velvet embroidered with gold thread. You haven't so much as twitched yet, but your day is already in motion. Somewhere below, a servant has risen hours earlier to stoke the fires. Another has been to the market for fresh bread, and a third is climbing the stairs now with your tea tray. The air in your bedroom smells faintly of beeswax polish and whatever floral scent is currently fashionable in Mayfair. Outside the window, though you will not open it, a private carriage waits in the mews, its driver nursing a hot mug. The only coughs you hear belong to the horses. When the maid sweeps in, she does not ask if you'd like tea. She simply places it on the small table beside you, next to a folded newspaper and a silver-backed hairbrush. Your morning wash involves warm water poured into a porcelain basin with a blue willow pattern, your towels thick and freshly laundered. By the time you're ready to rise, the fire has been topped up, your slippers warmed, and your clothes for the day laid out on a stand. You may feel faintly virtuous about having to endure the mild draft near the window, the hardships of life in town. But in truth, you've barely moved a muscle, and the most exhausting thing so far has been deciding between the red waistcoat or the blue. Now, the other you. In the East End, you wake not to the sound of footsteps on thick carpet, but to the scrape of a bucket in the hallway outside. It's the neighbor emptying last night's waste into the shared privy. There are 13 people in the building, 2 families in one room, and the smell of damp straw and coal smoke clings to everything. The blanket over you is thin, really more of a worn shawl, and still damp from the condensation that drips down the wall on cold nights. You roll over carefully, trying not to wake the youngest, who is curled at your feet. Outside the grimy window, the street is already awake. Cartwheels rattle over cobblestones. A costermonger shouts about his oranges. Somewhere close by, a baby cries. And above it all, from the room upstairs, comes the steady wet cough of your neighbor, the one who's been not quite right all winter. There is no tea tray, no maid. You pull on yesterday's clothes, which have been drying on a chair by the fire. Except there is no fire. The coal box is empty, and the only water is from the public pump down the street. You fetch it yourself, bracing for the cold bite as you splash your face. There is no towel. You wipe your hands on your skirt or trousers and keep moving. It is still morning in both Londons, but the gap between them could not be wider. In the West End, your greatest discomfort is that the tea is slightly overbrewed. In the East End, Your tea is water with a dash of milk, if the milk hasn't turned. In the West End, your hygiene routine involves scented soap, warmed basins, and hair that is brushed 100 strokes before breakfast. In the East End, morning hygiene means cupping cold water in your hands at the pump, hoping the line isn't too long, and brushing your hair with whatever comb has the fewest missing teeth. In the West End, the streets outside are swept before you step onto them. In the East End, the streets are the sewer, refuse, offal, and horse dung mixing underfoot. You step carefully, not to preserve the shine on your boots, you don't have any to shine, but to avoid slipping. If you are the West End your first choice today will be between an easy morning spent writing letters by the fire or an early carriage to visit an acquaintance. If you are the East End your first choice is whether to spend what little you have on food now or save it for the midday meal, because there won't be enough for both. And here's the strangest part. Both versions of you live in the same city, breathe the same cold London air, and technically belong to the same nation under the same monarch. But the West End version of you will never step into the East End unless there's a charity tour involved. And the East End version of you will never be allowed through the front door of a West End townhouse except to carry coal up the back stairs. The day hasn't even truly begun, and already you can feel the weight of that divide. One of you will dress in fine wool and head out with clean gloves. The other will spend the day with cold fingers, patched clothes, and dirt under the nails that never quite washes out. Two worlds, one morning. And you, unlucky or lucky, depending on the toss of history's coin, are about to live them both. Breakfast is supposed to be the great equalizer. Everyone needs it. Everyone enjoys it. Everyone starts their day with, well, that's where equality ends. In your West End body, you wander slowly toward the dining room. There's no rush. Breakfast will wait for you. It has, in fact, been waiting since before you were fully awake. A footman in a perfectly pressed livery opens the door. The table is a theater of silver and porcelain, a pot of Assam tea steaming gently in its pot-bellied silver teapot, bone china cups lined up like soldiers awaiting orders. The toast rack holds neat triangles of bread that were buttered the moment they emerged from the toasting fork, their surfaces still glistening. There are eggs, too, poached, boiled, or scrambled, depending on your whim. Beside them, a porcelain jug of fresh cream from the country estate, and a small army of imported jams, Seville orange marmalade, strawberry preserve, blackcurrant jelly, all brought to you from distant places by rail, ship, and the patience of people who will never set foot in a dining room like this. The smell is rich, tea leaves unfurling, warm bread, bacon curling on the sideboard. It's a breakfast designed not just to feed you, but to reassure you. Yes, you are comfortable. And yes, the day is starting just as it should. If anything is wrong, it's that the quail is slightly underdone. And that is worth at least 3 sentences of complaint. Now, slip back into your East End skin. The room is colder here, the air damp, and breakfast is not quite the ceremony it is in the West End. You drink it, or you don't. That's the choice. If there's tea, it's weak enough to read the bottom of the cup through. Milk is a rare luxury. Sugar is rationed to the spoon you can stretch across several days. Your bread is yesterday's, maybe the day before, spread with dripping. The solidified fat saved from whatever meat was last boiled in the household. If there's no bread, there might be a cold boiled potato, a relic from last night's supper, eaten with your fingers. The smell here is not of marmalade and hot toast. It's of damp wood, coal dust from the neighbor's hearth, and the faint sourness of food that has just begun to turn. In the absence of cream, you have water, drawn from the pump in the street, heavy in the bucket, cold on your hands. You eat standing because the single table is already claimed by sewing work, and because sitting in a cold room without enough food only makes you notice the hunger more. In the West End, fresh means eggs that traveled from a countryside estate overnight, butter churned within the last 48 hours, and quail that could still be described by the chef as perfectly tender, unless of course you find it too pink. In the East End, fresh means the cabbage hasn't yet gone completely yellow, and the bread isn't more than 2 days stale. The potato is still firm enough to hold together when you bite it. If you're lucky, the carrots haven't sprouted yet. The wealthy complain when the butter isn't soft enough to spread without tearing the bread. The poor are just pleased when the bread exists. For the wealthy, breakfast is an event. A table is laid. The silverware is polished. There is time to read the newspaper, to write a letter, to sit with the cup and think about the day ahead. Servants move quietly in the background, anticipating needs before they are spoken aloud. For the poor, breakfast is fuel. It is not something you linger over, because there is no time to linger. The day's work starts early, and if you are late, someone else will take your place, or your pay will be docked. You eat what you have, fast, and then you go. In both worlds, you put something in your mouth in the morning. But in one, it is a choice, perhaps too many choices. In the other, it is a question of whether you will eat at all. The West End, you folds the newspaper neatly after reading about grain prices and railway expansions. The East End, you wipes your hands on your clothes and leaves, hoping the day brings a little more than yesterday did. It is not that the wealthy are evil for wanting their eggs cooked just right. It is simply that the space to complain about undercooked quail comes only when hunger is never a question. For the poor, hunger is the constant question. It is why you notice the bread is harder, why you scrape every last smear of dripping from the knife, why you drink the tea even though it tastes mostly of water. And somewhere, both versions of you exist at the same hour, just streets apart, starting the same day with meals so different they could be from different centuries. If you want this channel to keep providing you with good videos, subscribe. Or we may as well clear it away from the table for good. The day doesn't officially begin until you're dressed for it. And in Victorian Britain, clothing is more than fabric. It's a public announcement of who you are, what you earn, and how you expect to be treated. In your wealthy skin, you do not so much dress as you are dressed. A lady's maid or valet lays everything out before you even step out of the bath. For a gentleman, that means a crisp shirt, boiled and pressed until it is whiter than the idea of heaven. A tailored morning coat and trousers with a crease sharp enough to draw blood. Your cravat is starched, your boots polished to a mirrored shine. For a lady, the process is longer. First the chemise, then the corset, tightened until you wonder if breathing was really that important. Then the petticoats, crinoline, and layers of skirts that make sitting an architectural challenge. A silk gown follows, chosen for its sheen, its color, and its ability to whisper wealth without having to shout. Gloves are silk, the parasol lace, and the bonnet an arrangement of ribbons and feathers that could double as a small aviary. Dressing is a production, and the stagehands, your servants, know their cues. The result? You step into the day, a walking testament to the power of money to smooth out the creases in life. Now, back to your other self, the one waking in the East End. There's no valet here, no lady's maid. Just you, a chair piled with yesterday's clothes, and the knowledge that today's outfit will look almost exactly like yesterday's, because it is yesterday's. The wool is heavy, coarse, and more patch than original fabric in places. Repairs are done with whatever thread is to hand, meaning your sleeves could be held together by stitches in a color no one in the West End would dare wear in public. If you're lucky, your jacket still has most of its buttons. If not, you close it with a safety pin or simply let it hang. Trousers are worn until the knees are shiny and thin. Dresses are dark, not for fashion, but because dark cloth hides dirt longer, buying you a few extra days before washing. Shoes are the most telling detail. In the West End, they are polished daily. Here, they are worn until the soles thin to nothing, then stuffed with paper to keep out the cold. This is the part where Victorian society likes to repeat the motto, "Cleanliness is next to godliness." It sounds noble until you remember that half the city can't afford soap. In your West End self, soap comes from perfumed blocks cut from the best shops. It smells faintly of lavender or rose, and it's used daily without a thought. Laundry is done by someone else, drying in clean, airy spaces where it doesn't pick up soot before it's even folded. In your East End self, soap is a purchase you weigh against bread. Laundry is done in cold water, sometimes without any soap at all, and hung to dry wherever there's space. Often in the same room where food is cooked, coal dust settles, and damp never quite goes away. The wealthy interpret clean as worthy. The poor interpret clean as nearly impossible. In the West End, your clothing says, "I have money, I have servants, and I have time to care about things like matching gloves to my hat ribbon." In the East End, your clothing says, "I work hard, I walk everywhere, and I patch my elbows because fabric costs more than my daily wages." The divide is so obvious that even strangers on the street know which side you belong to before you open your mouth. For the wealthy, clothing is a statement. For the poor, clothing is a survival tool. In both cases, it's heavy, in fabric for the rich, in burden for the poor. One version of you steps into the day confident, the creases in your trousers echoing the straight lines of your secure life. The other steps into the same day already tired, carrying not just the weight of the wool on your back, but the weight of being instantly recognizable as someone from the wrong side of the city. And so, dressed as two different people, you both step into the same Victorian morning. But the streets you walk will treat you very, very differently. In Victorian Britain, getting from where you are to where you have to be depends less on distance and more on the size of your bank account. In your poor skin, commute means one thing: walk. You walk because there's no other option. Not unless you've somehow found the fare for an omnibus, which is roughly the same as giving up your breakfast. You leave your tenement before the sun has fully cleared the soot from yesterday's fires. The cobblestones are slick with last night's rain, and the gutters run with a thin, foul-smelling soup of coal dust, rotting vegetables, and the occasional rat. Your shoes, what's left of them, squelch with every step. The leather has worn so thin at the toes that the cobbles tap against your feet. The streets smell of damp wool, horse manure, and the sharp ammonia sting from chamber pots emptied into the gutter. Passing carts splash your hem with a mixture of rainwater and something you choose not to think about. You head toward the docks or the factory, weaving between hawkers setting up stalls and children already working, carrying pails of water, sweeping doorways, or simply loitering because no one is paying them today. The air is thick, not with the scent of morning coffee, but with smoke from coal fires and the tang of fish being gutted right there on the street. And so you keep walking. Miles, sometimes, because work isn't just around the corner when you live in a slum. Work is wherever someone is desperate enough to hire you, and that could be half the city away. Now switch to your wealthy self. You've finished breakfast, you're dressed in your fine coat or silk gown, and you have absolutely no intention of walking anywhere. If you must leave the house at all, and many days you don't, you do so in a private carriage. The footman opens the door, you step inside, and off you go without so much as a drop of rain touching your hat. The horse's hooves clip-clop through the clean, orderly streets of the West End, where the gutters are discreet, the air is fresher, and the shop windows glitter with imported goods. There's no sidestepping puddles here, because there are none. No dodging carts piled with coal, no brushing shoulders with strangers carrying crates of fish. The only smell is the faint perfume from the lady across the carriage, or perhaps the fresh bread from a nearby bakery. Even the noise is gentler, the rustle of skirts, the soft jingle of harness bells. And yet, these two commutes happen in the same city, sometimes at the same time, only a few miles apart. In the East End, you pass men already coughing from the factory air, women with hands red raw from scrubbing, and children darting into the street to snatch at a dropped crust. In the West End, you pass gentlemen tipping their hats to ladies, shopkeepers sweeping their doorsteps, and dogs being walked purely for the novelty of it, not to find scraps. It's a split-screen world. On one side, grime, noise, and the endless sound of feet on wet cobbles. On the other, polished boots stepping out of carriages onto clean pavements. For the poor, every step is unpaid labor before the actual labor. Your commute costs you time and the thin soles of your shoes. If you're late, there's no excuse the foreman will accept. For the rich, the commute, if you can even call it that, is an opportunity to be seen. Arriving somewhere in a private carriage is a statement. I have arrived because I wanted to, not because I had to. The smells are the most democratic thing in Victorian London. They travel. But how you experience them depends entirely on which streets you travel through. In the East End, the air tastes of coal smoke, sewage, and sweat. In the West End, you might catch the whiff of manure from your own carriage horses, but it's quickly overpowered by the scent of flowers from a well-tended garden or the faint sweetness of expensive tobacco. And so, whether it's the slow roll of a carriage wheel or the slap of worn soles against the street, both versions of you head toward your day. But one of you will arrive dry, composed, and exactly on time, because your driver made sure of it. The other will arrive damp, tired, and already feeling as though you've put in half a day's work, before the real work has even begun. Work, in Victorian Britain, is less about what you do, and more about how quickly it kills you. By the time you've trudged through the streets, dodged carts, and arrived at the factory gates, you're already tired. But now, the real work begins. 12 to 14 hours of it, without the faintest hope of an early finish. If you're in the match factory, the air is thick with the white dust of phosphorus. Your fingers grow sore and yellow-stained. Your jaw aches with an odd, deep pain you try to ignore, because the older girls say it's Fossy jaw, and once you have that, you're done for. You don't stop unless the overseer shouts for it, and even then, you keep your eyes down. If you're sweeping chimneys, you're small enough to climb inside them. That's the whole reason you have the job. You wriggle up the black shaft, scraping soot into your mouth and eyes, coughing until your ribs hurt. If you're lucky, you come back down in one piece. If you're not, they have to pull you out by the ankles. The factory floor is no safer. The weaving machines snatch at loose hair and sleeves. The cotton dust clogs your lungs. The noise is so constant, so deafening, that silence will feel unnatural to you for the rest of your life. The pay, barely enough to cover your rent for that one damp room, the same one you leave in the dark and return to in the dark. Now step into your wealthy skin. You work, too. At least, that's what you call it. You begin your day in a leather armchair in your study, papers neatly arranged on your desk. Your task is to read through the letters from your broker, perhaps sign a few documents, and make a decision about whether to invest in a shipping company or a new railway venture. It's not so much about earning money as moving it, like rearranging furniture in a drawing room. By mid-morning, you've retired to your club. A gentleman's club, naturally. No factory noise here, unless you count the clink of teaspoons. The air smells faintly of cigars and brandy, and the greatest danger to your health is dozing too long in front of the fire. Here, business is done in the form of conversation, murmured agreements over billiards, whispered tips about which stock to buy, and the occasional chuckle over some poor fool who made the wrong bet on the market. And if you're a wealthy woman, your work might be the careful management of your household staff. You write out the menus, approve the ordering of fresh flowers, and arrange the week's social visits. All of this, of course, is carried out from the comfort of a chaise longue. For the poor, fatigue is physical. It's the ache in your back from standing at the loom. It's the sting of blisters from a day spent carrying bricks. It's coughing until your chest burns because the dust in the air is thicker than the air itself. For the rich, fatigue is, dare we say, theatrical. You sigh over the strain of a long meeting at the club or the effort of attending 2 luncheons in the same week. You complain, half-jokingly, about the difficulty of deciding which opera to attend, as though your brain were a coal mine and you just emptied it. And yet, both yous, the poor you and the rich you, go home believing you've worked hard. The poor you knows you've worked hard because every muscle says so. The rich you believes you've worked hard because society says so. In fact, society will praise the rich man's shuffling of papers more than the poor man's 14 hours at the loom. That's Victorian logic. The less your work resembles actual labor, the more respectable it is. By midday, the difference between the 2 versions of you is visible from space. The poor you is probably gulping down bread and tea on the factory floor, still wearing the dust and grease of the morning shift. The rich you is taking luncheon at a mahogany table, possibly with a glass of wine, in clothes untouched by dirt, smoke, or effort. Both will return to their respective work after lunch, but only one will return with a full stomach. The poor you trades life for pennies, spending hours for coins. The rich you spends coins to buy hours. Hours of comfort, hours of leisure, hours that look from the outside like freedom. It's not that the rich never feel trapped. They are trapped by reputation, by social obligations, by the pressure to maintain appearances. But their trap comes with cushions and tea service. The poor man's trap has rusted bars. Now, before we go any further down this long Victorian day, a quick word. Most of you just lurk here like a ghost, You listen, you take the goods, you enjoy the service, and you stroll away without so much as subscribing. Fix that before the gossip spreads. By midday, the city is split, not just by wealth, but by what's on the plate in front of you. And you're about to eat, or not, depending on which version of you we're talking about. The clock strikes 1, and your butler discreetly announces that luncheon is served. Not food, not a bite to eat. Luncheon, a word that already tastes expensive. You make your way to the dining room, where the table has been laid with gleaming silverware, cut crystal glasses, and folded linen napkins, each creased so sharply you could cut paper with them. The menu? Roast beef, pink in the middle, its edges just beginning to crisp. There's a tureen of rich gravy, its surface shimmering like a brown mirror, and roasted potatoes with golden blistered skins that crack under the fork. Perhaps a side of buttered carrots, their orange softened to a polite Victorian hue, nothing too vulgar. And then, of course, pudding. It's not dessert yet. This is luncheon pudding, something steamed and dense, served with a warm custard. You eat slowly, because luncheon is not about filling yourself. It's about not having anywhere else to be. If you're a gentleman, you might have a small glass of claret. If you're a lady, perhaps a cordial or a delicate cup of tea, because Victorian society believes women are somehow incapable of digesting red meat without emotional consequences. And when you're done, you sit back in your chair, not because you're tired, but because someone else will clear the plates. Now, strip away the silver, the pudding, the polished glasses. You're standing in a street off Whitechapel, the smell of fish guts and horse manure fighting for dominance in the air. Your lunch is a hunk of bread, the crust so hard you might use it to patch the roof at home. If you're lucky, there's a smear of dripping, fat collected from a joint of meat you didn't see cooked. If you're luckier still, a wedge of cheese. You eat standing up, because there's nowhere to sit, and because the factory horn will blow soon enough. Around you, men shovel food into their mouths, talking with it still in there because time is money and neither is on your side. You wash it down with tea so weak it looks more like an afterthought than a drink. No milk. Milk is for people who can afford to store it before it turns. And you don't have a pudding course. You don't even have a plate. For the rich, lunch smells of roast meat, polished wood, and wine. It sounds like the soft chink of cutlery, the low hum of conversation, the occasional laugh from a guest who's already thinking about their afternoon ride in the park. For the poor lunch smells like smoke, sweat, and bread gone stale. It sounds like the clatter of cartwheels, the hiss of steam from the nearby factory, and the chorus of voices all talking over one another before the foreman calls everyone back in. For the rich, food freshness is a preference. The beef must be carved just after resting. The bread must be baked this morning. The butter must be soft enough to spread without tearing the loaf. If any of these conditions fail, the cook will hear about it. For the poor, food freshness is a miracle. Bread that isn't hard yet, cheese without green fuzz, vegetables that haven't already started to collapse in on themselves. Those are the days you'll remember. Here's the unspoken truth of the Victorian lunch gap. The poor is never really full. Even after lunch, there's a hollow space inside that bread and tea can't touch. That hunger walks back to work with you, follows you through the afternoon shift, and curls up beside you at night like an unwanted bedfellow. The rich you're more in danger of boredom than hunger. In fact, sometimes you leave food untouched, not because you're full, but because fashion says it's unrefined to clear your plate. In both worlds, lunch is more than food. It's a statement. For the rich, it's proof you have time to pause, to sit, to be served. For the poor, it's a reminder that the day is far from over, that the work bell will ring and you'll be back to the grind before the taste of bread has even faded. After luncheon, rich you might take a turn in the garden, admiring the roses while the coachman readies the carriage. Poor you heads back through the alleyways, wiping crumbs from your coat, trying not to notice that your stomach already feels empty. In the grand scale of the Victorian day, lunch is a short intermission, but for some, it's a performance in a dining room with chandeliers. For others, it's a snack in the gutter before the curtain rises on more work. By early afternoon, your two lives split more sharply than ever. As the poor you, there's no gentle slope into the next part of the day, no pause, no breath. The moment the last crumb of bread is gone, you're back at the factory gate, your body already bracing for the hours ahead. The horn sounds, and you file in with dozens of others, boots scuffing against the worn floorboards, the air thick with dust, oil, and the heat of the machines. It's not work so much as a battle. Your hands raw from pulling thread, your lungs aching from the constant haze, your ears ringing from the clatter of gears and the shouts of foremen. You don't think about the end of the shift. Thinking about the end makes the minutes stretch out like weeks. If you're a child in this world, you might be back up a chimney, scraping soot from brick with your fingernails. If you're a match girl, you're handling sticks tipped with white phosphorus, your skin itching where it makes contact, your jaw aching faintly in a way you try not to notice. If you're a dock worker, you're hoisting sacks of grain or crates of tea from far-off colonies you'll never see, your muscles burning with each lift. The light from the windows fades slowly, but you barely notice. It's the rhythm of labor that tells you what time it is, not the sun. Meanwhile, your rich self is making an altogether different calculation. Which hat to wear for the afternoon's engagements? You're not going back to an office. Why would you, when you can run your investments through a trusted clerk? Instead, you're gliding down a marble staircase, the air cool from the stone, your boots or slippers clicking softly. A carriage waits outside, polished to a mirror shine. Perhaps you're calling on a friend in Mayfair, where the drawing room smells faintly of violets and the china cups are so thin you can almost see through them. The conversation is pleasant, predictable. A little gossip about who has married above their station. A polite debate over the merits of the new gas lamps. You nod in the right places, laugh softly when you're supposed to, but you're mostly here to be seen. In Victorian society, visibility is its own currency. Or maybe you've a committee meeting for a charitable cause, helping the deserving poor. This means sitting in a warm parlor discussing how to distribute a few shillings or a basket of food, preferably with enough ceremony that everyone notices your name on the donor list. You feel magnanimous. The poor feel not much different than before. If you're in a particularly indulgent mood, you might skip both and go shopping. Bond Street is lined with imported luxuries, silks from France, tea from India, perfumes bottled in Paris. You run your fingers over fabrics you'll never have to sew yourself. Select a necklace that costs more than a dock worker's yearly wage and sign the bill without looking at the total. Back in your poorer skin, your fingers are stiff, and the ache in your lower back has become a steady throb. The hours crawl. A clock ticks somewhere, but it's swallowed by the clank of machinery. You keep working, because stopping means losing your place or your job. The foreman's eyes scan the room like a hawk, ready to swoop on anyone who lags. The dust works its way into your mouth, your nose, your lungs. You cough, wipe your mouth with the back of your hand, and keep going. Rich you, at the same moment, is stepping into another drawing room, this one with heavy velvet drapes and a pianoforte in the corner. You're offered tea, real tea, steaming and fragrant, and a plate of delicate biscuits. You take one, not because you're hungry, but because refusing would be impolite. The pianist plays something light, conversation hums, and the clock seems to move without effort. Poor you feels time differently. Afternoon isn't a pleasant drift. It's a trench to crawl through. The last 2 hours feel longer than the first 6. Sometimes the only thing that breaks the monotony is an accident. A scream when a finger gets caught in a loom, or when a crate slips and crushes a man's foot. There's no pause for sympathy. The work doesn't stop. And yet these 2 afternoons, one of exhaustion, one of leisure, exist in the same city, often separated by nothing more than a few streets. The West End doesn't smell the East End's smoke. The East End doesn't taste the West End's tea. By the time the work whistle blows for poor you, the muscles in your arms are twitching involuntarily. You walk home slowly, each step measured, because the day's work has burned through your energy. Rich you, by contrast, is arriving home with cheeks faintly flushed from conversation and a new hat box on your lap. The air in your townhouse smells faintly of polish and baking bread, because someone else has been making sure it does. The gap is not just in what you have. It's in how the hours treat you. For one of you, the afternoon is a field to stroll across. For the other, it's a mountain to climb every single day. By the time the day tilts toward evening, you, both versions of you, are heading home. But the word means something very different depending on which set of boots you're wearing. Poor you trudges through narrow lanes, where the air grows heavier the closer you get. The cobblestones are slick from the day's rain, but it's not just water pooling between them. Bits of refuse, the day's chamber pot contents tossed from a window earlier, a mashed potato peel clinging to your shoe. The buildings loom overhead like tired sentries, their bricks blackened by soot, their windows grimy. You step through a doorway into a tenement where the hallway is so dim you could trip on the warped floorboards. Your home is one room. It's the same room you cook in, eat in, sleep in, and, if you're lucky, keep a few personal possessions. The damp walls have a smell you've learned not to notice. Mold, rot, the lingering tang of boiled cabbage. In the corner, a rag-stuffed hole keeps most of the rats from strolling in, but you still hear them scuttling behind the boards at night. The shared privy is outside in the courtyard, a wooden hut with a seat that creaks under your weight, and a smell that could strip the inside of your nose. There's no lighting out there after sunset, just the glow from a neighbor's candle in a window. Sometimes you carry your own, but that risks tripping on the stairs when one hand is full. You drop onto the bed, a sagging mattress stuffed with straw that shifts uncomfortably every time you move. The straw is damp at the edges from the condensation that seeps through the walls. You pull your thin blanket over your shoulders and listen to the sound of an upstairs neighbor hacking into a cloth, the cough echoing faintly against the cracked plaster. Meanwhile, Rich you steps down from a polished carriage onto dry paving stones outside a townhouse in the West End. Gas lamps glow warmly along the street, and the front door swings open before you even reach it. The hallway is lit by more gaslight, throwing a soft golden hue across a runner carpet. Your coat is taken from you before you've even thought about where to put it. The air smells faintly of beeswax polish and whatever the cook is preparing for supper. Each room you pass is ready for occupation, fires already lit, chairs angled invitingly toward them, upholstery plump and clean. In the drawing room, a decanter of sherry waits on a tray, glasses already polished to a fault. You pause to glance in the mirror, adjusting a cufflink or tucking a stray hair back into place. In this world, modesty is indeed a virtue, but mostly for other people. The wealthy praise restraint in spending, restraint in speech, restraint in clothing, so long as they themselves can indulge freely without being called vulgar. The principle is simple. Modesty makes a fine curtain behind which the rich can keep the good things for themselves. Back in your poorer skin, the fire in your grate, if you've won it all, is so small, it's really just the idea of a fire. You ration the coal like it's gold dust because it's expensive and there's never enough to last through winter. Sometimes you and your neighbors chip in for a larger bucket, taking turns keeping the flames alive for an hour or two. It's not the kind of arrangement anyone writes about in society pages. Rich you, on the other hand, doesn't think about coal beyond asking the servant to make sure the fire's good and hot. The flames crackle without effort, and you can leave them burning in multiple rooms even if you're not in them. An extravagance the poor couldn't dream of without wondering what they'd have to skip at the grocer to afford it. The evening stretches differently too. For the poor, it's time to cook whatever's cheapest and most filling. Boiled potatoes, bread, maybe a scrap of meat if there's any left from the market stall at closing. For the rich, supper will be a multi-course affair in a dining room lit by chandeliers, the table set with silver cutlery and crystal glasses. Yet, for all the comfort of the wealthy's gas lamps and upholstered chairs, there's an unspoken truth. They live in houses designed not just for living, but for showing. The drawing rooms, the dining rooms, the hallways, each is a stage where wealth is displayed under carefully arranged light. And modesty, that favorite virtue of theirs, is always just the backdrop. And here's where I'm going to stop and look directly at you. Yes, you, the one listening. If no one tells these stories, the only Victorian lives remembered will be the ones with silver cutlery. Subscribe so that's not the case. Because the truth is, history doesn't remember damp tenements unless someone makes it. And right now, that someone is me, dragging you through gaslit parlors and rat-filled corners alike. Evening in Victorian Britain doesn't just split by income. It splits childhood in two entirely different species of existence. Poor you, the parent of a 5-year-old, has already sent your child out into the streets or into the factory by sunrise. There's no time for morning songs or practice on the piano. There's barely time for them to choke down a crust of bread before the long day ahead. If they're in the match factory, their small hands are working with white phosphorus, an invisible poison that might slowly rot away their jaw. If they're sweeping chimneys, they're crawling through pitch-dark flues, lungs filling with soot, skin scraping against bricks. Sometimes they're hawking watercress or selling flowers to wealthier pedestrians, calling out with voices already hoarse from the London air. Their workday is long, and school, if it happens at all, is a rare treat rather than a guarantee. Literacy? That's a luxury when each day's priority is survival. The alphabet doesn't fill bellies. A few philanthropic schools try to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic in cramped rooms that smell of coal and damp wool. But attendance is erratic. It's hard to learn when you're nodding off from hunger. Rich you, in another part of the city, has children who will never set foot in a factory. Their hands are soft, their nails clean. They have a governess to oversee morning lessons, French verbs before breakfast, music scales before midday. The nursery is bright, lined with toys imported from Paris or Berlin, the walls painted in cheerful pastels. Here, the word work means practicing the pianoforte or reciting lines from Shakespeare. Afternoons for poor children are often indistinguishable from mornings. The same repetitive labor, the same fatigue. A game might be a quick race down an alley, or the thrill of finding a discarded apple core that's still edible. A doll is a rag tied with string. A ball might be a bundled scrap of cloth. For the rich, afternoons are for education disguised as leisure. Drawing lessons, riding practice in Hyde Park. Geography maps spread on polished desks, while tutors explain the British Empire with a tone that assumes its permanence. The children learn not only reading and numbers, but also how to carry themselves, how to speak, how to enter a room, how to avoid saying something common. These lessons are armor, invisible but powerful. And yet, for all this cultivation, both groups of children share one thing. They are shaped entirely by the class lottery they were born into. The poor child learns resilience, sometimes at the cost of their health. The rich child learns refinement, sometimes at the cost of understanding reality. Evening comes. Poor children, if they return home at all rather than collapsing in a corner of the workshop, are bone-tired. Supper might be bread dipped in weak tea, eaten quickly before bed. They sleep in the same room as parents and siblings, sometimes on the floor, sometimes sharing a mattress that smells faintly of coal dust and unwashed clothes. Rich children dine later, often in the nursery away from adults, on roasted meats, puddings, and fruit. Afterward, they may be read to by the governess, lulled to sleep by tales of ancient kings or far-off lands they might one day visit. They sleep in crisp sheets under heavy quilts, with a fire flickering softly in the grate. You can walk through these two worlds in the same city in under an hour, crossing from tenement to townhouse, and yet they might as well be on different planets. In one, a child's laughter is a stolen moment between labor and fatigue. In the other, it's an expected part of the day's rhythm, safe within walls that keep out the cold. And maybe that's the part that should unsettle you most. How these parallel lives existed side by side. How the gulf between them was maintained not by accident, but by design. History loves to romanticize Victorian childhood as lace collars and toy theaters. But most Victorian children never saw either. And if you don't remember the ones who didn't, the only childhoods that remain in memory will be the ones written in silk and silver. Evening draws in over Victorian London, and the gulf between dinner tables grows wider than the Thames itself. In the West End, your evening begins in a dining room so polished it could almost be a museum. The table stretches far enough that you could seat a small village at it. But tonight, it's just you, your family, and a handful of carefully chosen guests. The first course arrives on silver platters, carried by liveried servants whose footsteps are silent against the carpet. Crystal glasses sparkle under gaslight, each one filled with a different wine matched to the dish in front of you. The napkins are folded into shapes that would make a poor man's head spin. Swans, crowns, and once, for a special occasion, an entire battleship. The meal isn't just food, it's theater. Soup, fish, roast meats, vegetables prepared so tender they practically collapse on the fork, puddings rich with imported sugar, fruits brought in from warmer climates, and costing more than a dock worker's monthly wage. You lean back in your chair as each dish is replaced by the next, occasionally lifting your fork with a kind of elegant boredom. If a quail is slightly undercooked, it's sent away without a second thought. The roast beef is carved with ceremonial precision, the gravy poured as though it were a rare perfume. Conversation drifts from politics to gossip, each subject weighed for its propriety before it's spoken aloud. A few streets away, the evening is nothing like this. Your dining table is a scarred wooden board in a cramped room where the walls sweat in winter. The air is heavy with the smell of boiled cabbage, again, or whatever could be thrown into the pot. A scrap of bread, maybe some dripping if you're lucky. Sometimes it's just tea, weak, barely colored, no milk. You eat sitting on a stool or the edge of the bed, children crouched close around the pot, each waiting for their portion. No one speaks much. The sounds from the street seep in, cartwheels, shouting, the occasional cry of a hungry baby from next door. The contrast is grotesque in its simplicity. A silver fork gliding through tender lamb in one world, a bent spoon scraping the last bit of potato from the bottom of the pot in another. In the grand houses, meat that never left the plate will be scraped away into the bin, what the wealthy politely call kitchen waste. In the tenements, you'd scrape a bone clean, gnawing at it to make sure not a shred of meat goes to waste. You notice things if you're paying attention. In the West End, they complain about a pheasant being a touch overdone before abandoning it entirely. In the East End, a family might survive 2 days on the broth made from that same bird's bones. In drawing rooms, the idea of hunger is something discussed in charitable committees over sherry. In your room, it's the thing that wakes you in the middle of the night. And the strangest part? Many in those grand houses believe this is how the world should be. The natural order, they call it, as though the Almighty himself had handed out silver cutlery to a chosen few and left the rest to fight over scraps. They called it the natural order. You can call it what it was, cruelty. And if no one tells these stories, the only Victorian dinners remembered will be the ones served on silver under gaslight. Keep the rest alive by subscribing. Night doesn't just fall in Victorian Britain. It drapes itself differently over each side of the city, as if the sky itself knows who can afford light after dark. The gas lamps burn steady along the West End streets, throwing a warm golden glow over stone facades and iron railings polished to a mirror. In the East End, the same lamps sputter in the fog, casting only enough light to make the shadows seem deeper. You could almost believe you were in 2 different centuries, if not for the occasional echo of carriage wheels or the faint drift of coal smoke that ties the whole city together. If you're poor, the evening is a question of where to thaw out and whether you can afford to do it sitting down. Your body aches from the day's work, your hands raw from rope or factory tools, your back stiff from lifting crates, bending over sewing tables, or walking miles between jobs. You step into the public house, not because you love the drink, but because you love heat, noise, and the comfort of not being alone. The door sticks a little as you push it open, and inside, the air hits you like a blanket that's been hanging over the fire too long, thick with smoke, beer, gin, and the faintest whiff of wet wool steaming dry. The gin here isn't a delicately infused blend of herbs and citrus. It's harsh enough to make your teeth tingle and your stomach tighten. 1 penny buys you a glass, and a few more will buy you the pleasant forgetfulness that keeps you from noticing the damp in your bones. You might take it slow, or you might drink it like water. Either way, you'll taste it for hours. And there's music, of a sort. A fiddler in the corner, bow arm moving as fast as his fingers can bear, trying to keep pace with a few men stamping their feet in time. The floorboards bend under the weight of the crowd, and every time the door opens, the cold sneaks in, swirling around your ankles like a cat you didn't invite. The talk is loud, the jokes are rough, and the arguments flare quick. One wrong look, and a man might take offense, especially if the drink has loosened his temper. But it's also here that you hear the news. Which ships came in, which foreman's hiring, which family's been evicted. The pub is as much a bulletin board as it is an escape. And for a few hours the world feels a little smaller, a little warmer, a little more human. Meanwhile, across the city, the rich are staging an entirely different evening. Your carriage waits outside your townhouse, the wheels shining as if they've been polished just for tonight, which of course they have. You step inside, cushioned by velvet seats, the lanterns inside glowing softer than any streetlight could manage. Your coat is heavy wool lined with silk, your gloves lambskin, and you've changed into evening clothes that cost more than a dock worker's yearly rent. Perhaps tonight you're bound for the theater. The gaslights burn steady here, bathing the facade in brilliance, and the crowd that gathers is dressed for admiration as much as entertainment. You step into your private box, no queuing, no jostling for a view, and glance down at the stage as the overture begins. The actors speak in voices that reach even the farthest row, though you never have to strain to hear them. There's a quiet etiquette here. No shouting, no stamping, only polite applause between acts. Or perhaps you've accepted an invitation to a private concert. The host's drawing room gleams with polished wood and glittering crystal. Beeswax candles throw a flattering light, and the scent of hot wine mingles with perfume. A pianist sits at the grand, playing Chopin or Liszt, the notes falling like fine rain over the rustle of silk gowns and the soft chime of silverware from the supper table. You sip something imported, port from Portugal, champagne from France, and discuss the latest political scandal, or perhaps just the weather in Devon, depending on the company. There are balls, too. Nights where the music doesn't end until dawn. The chandeliers seem to drip with light, and the floor itself shines with polish. Every turn on the dance floor is an opportunity to make a match or secure an alliance. This is leisure as theater, as transaction, as self-presentation. But no one calls it work. The contrast is sharp, but the aim is the same: to feel lighter than the day. In the pub, it's about dulling the hunger and the ache. In the ballroom, it's about chasing novelty and admiration. Both sides cling to the few hours before sleep, because tomorrow will arrive whether you welcome it or not. When the evening ends, you walk home through streets that smell of rain on coal smoke, your boots soaking through before you're halfway. You pass silent shop fronts and shuttered stalls, the last drunks leaning against lampposts, the occasional stray dog rooting in a heap of rubbish. The air is sharp enough to sting your cheeks, and by the time you reach your building, your hands are numb. You climb the stairs in the dark, listening to the muffled coughs and snores behind thin walls, and you collapse onto the bed without bothering to take off your boots. If you're rich, the night ends differently. The carriage waits outside the theater or the host's home, warmed inside by a discreet footman's brazier. You return to a house still glowing from its fires, where a servant takes your coat. Another brings you one last drink, and the air smells faintly of lavender from the linen press. You might read by lamplight for a while, or dictate a letter before retiring to a bed that could swallow you whole. The same hour, the same city, and yet separated not just by streets, but by the entire architecture of life. When the last market cries have faded and the street lamps glow in the fog, London doesn't truly sleep. It changes shape. The city folds itself inward, each home becoming its own sealed world, the gaps between them as wide as the empire's oceans. And you, unlucky enough to be living two lives in one night, are about to experience both extremes. In your first body, you're trudging home to the East End, your boots, or what's left of them, squelching through the muck between cobblestones. You duck into a narrow court where the air hangs heavy, unmoved for days. The stairs up to your room are steep, dark, and so narrow your shoulder brushes peeling plaster. The railing wobbles under your hand. You pass doors with rag-stuffed cracks at the bottom to keep the cold from creeping in, though of course it still does. The moment you open your own door, the warmth of body heat rushes out. Not the gentle warmth of a fireplace, but the stifling closeness of too many people breathing the same air. The smell hits first. Damp straw, unwashed wool, boiled cabbage from the neighbor's pot, and the faint ammonia of the bucket in the corner that serves as a privy when you can't face the icy walk to the shared one outside. You step carefully. The room is small enough that one careless move can wake the baby sleeping on a pallet of rags, or trip over your eldest child curled on the floor. You sleep in the only bed, a narrow iron frame with a mattress that sags in the middle. The ticking is worn so thin you can feel the lumps of ancient straw inside. Tonight you share it with two children, one wedged against your back, the other draped over your legs. Every movement tugs the blankets away from someone else. You can hear every breath, every cough, and the occasional creak of the floorboards as your upstairs neighbor turns in his own crowded bed. The air is thick enough to taste, part coal smoke from the cheap grate downstairs, part mildew from the damp seeping through brick. The single small window barely opens, and even if it did, the winter fog outside smells of soot and sewage. This is the air you'll breathe until dawn, when the streets will demand your body again. Now, switch lives. Your other self has never climbed those stairs. Instead, you walk through a wide hallway lined with patterned carpet so thick your footsteps make no sound. A maid carries your gloves away to be brushed. The air smells faintly of beeswax from the polished furniture and lavender from the linen press. Upstairs, the fire in your bedroom grate glows warmly, the light dancing over gilt-framed paintings. Your clothes are loosened for you. Someone will fold them neatly away. On the washstand, porcelain basins and matching jugs hold hot water, steam curling gently into the air. You dip a cloth in and wash your face, marveling at how pleasant water feels when it's not cold enough to numb your hands. The bed here is wide enough to stretch without touching another soul. It's dressed in crisp linen sheets, ironed to perfection. Between the feather mattress below and the thick quilt above, you feel as though you've been gently swallowed by comfort itself. There's a hot water bottle at your feet, wrapped in flannel, so the warmth seeps slowly into your toes. Curtains of heavy damask seal out the winter night entirely. The room is a world unto itself. Here, the sounds are curated. Perhaps the distant clop of a single carriage outside, or the soft chime of the mantel clock reminding you it's time to sleep. There will be no shouts from the street, no dripping roof above your head, no rats scurrying behind the walls. You could close your eyes now and wake at your leisure, untroubled by anything more than the possibility of an overcooked breakfast egg. But in both beds, iron or carved mahogany, the city keeps breathing outside. The divide between your two selves is the space between survival and indulgence, and it's only deepened by the darkness. One lies awake, listening for the sound of rain that means the roof will drip again. The other drifts into dreams, warmed by coal mined by men who sleep in beds like the first. Tomorrow, both versions of you will wake to the same London, but the day that follows will be shaped entirely by which bed you rose from tonight. When the day begins, the streets are still slick from last night's rain, and so is the rhetoric. The first thing you notice, no matter which version of yourself you're waking up as, is that everyone, everywhere, has an opinion about the other half. The trouble is, only one half ever gets to publish theirs. As the wealthy you've spent the morning in a drawing room where the air smells faintly of beeswax polish and someone else's labor. The newspaper lies spread across a polished mahogany table. You skim the headlines between sips of coffee, imported, of course. In the editorial column, a gentleman with an excellent education and a comfortable income declares, with authority, that poverty is almost always self-inflicted. Laziness, intemperance, a lack of moral fiber. Your companions nod over the rims of their bone china cups. One remarks, without irony, that the poor are far too prone to vice, before recalling an amusing anecdote about a servant caught sneaking leftover custard. Another insists that any assistance must be carefully monitored. They mean conditional charity, relief given only if the recipient behaves in ways the giver approves of. Sobriety, piety, and gratitude are the holy trinity of Victorian benevolence. And if a struggling family fails to meet those expectations, why, that simply proves the point. Funds are cut, relief withdrawn, and the cycle rolls on. Even philanthropy is a performance, an exercise in control disguised as compassion. Now step outside that drawing room and into your other skin. The damp air catches in your chest. The cobbles smell of horse manure and coal dust. You've never been in that room upstairs, but you've felt the weight of its gaze. You've queued outside the parish hall for bread, seen the placards warning against intemperance, heard the sermons about thrift and obedience. You know the rules weren't made for fairness. You've watched the factory foreman dock a man's pay for being 10 minutes late after working 16 hours the day before. You've listened to a landlady call a widow improvident because she couldn't afford both rent and coal. You've stood in line for charity soup and felt the eyes on your boots, your cuffs, your face, as though the dirt on your clothes was a confession of sin. The hypocrisy is relentless. The wealthy drink champagne until dawn at a ball and call it society. You share a mug of gin after work, and it's moral collapse. They cancel an afternoon appointment to take the waters at Bath. You miss a shift to recover from fever, and you're a shirker. Their pleasures are refinements. Yours are vices. You notice every insult, though most are delivered without a raised voice. Condemnation comes wrapped in the velvet of improvement. They host lectures on the evils of idleness while dismissing your 14-hour days as unskilled. They raise funds for the deserving poor, as though the undeserving ones, those who drink, swear, or look the wrong sort, should simply vanish. The most galling part is how they speak about you as if you're not in the room, because often you aren't. Decisions about relief, housing, and schooling are made in committee rooms with gaslit chandeliers, far from the tenements they concern. Charity galas debate the problem of poverty over 6-course dinners. while actual poor families boil potatoes in a single blackened pot 2 streets away. If you were in the rich half of your life, you might believe the fiction. Poverty would look like a personal failure, not the result of wages that couldn't feed a child, rents that devoured half an income, and illnesses that swept through cramped housing like fire through tinder. In the poor half, you understand all too well, but your voice doesn't count. Your truths are not written down in books or recorded in ledgers. In Victorian Britain, judgment is both a pastime and a moral duty, if you're wealthy. It's a survival risk if you're not. The power lies entirely in who gets to define the narrative. And in 1875, as in 1850, those with silver cutlery are also the ones holding the only pens that matter. Even within charity, there's competition. The Lady Bountiful, who delivers blankets in person for the performance of gratitude. The church committee that insists on Sunday attendance before issuing coal tickets. It is kindness as a leash, warmth given, but only in exchange for obedience. You might imagine speaking back, telling them about the cold in winter, the cough that never goes away, the long walk home with wages barely enough for bread. But you know how it would go. They would purse their lips and remind you of someone who rose above their station through hard work, as though one anecdote erased the misery of thousands. And so the silence holds. The rich continue to write the story of Victorian society, omitting everything that makes them uncomfortable. In 100 years, if no one interrupts, those will be the only voices remembered. The gilt-edged ones, printed on thick paper, free from coal dust and coughs. But here you are now, hearing the rest of it, the damp, the hunger, the quiet rage, the part they didn't think worth keeping. You live in London, but in truth, you live in only half of it. The other half exists like a whispered rumor, plausible enough to believe in, but far enough away that you'll never have to prove it's real. When you're your West End self, you move through the city as though it's been built for you personally. The cobblestones under your carriage wheels have been swept before you pass. Gas lamps are lit precisely as the evening draws in, so the street feels like a stage bathed in golden light. You go from one manicured facade to another, club to drawing room, theater to supper, without ever venturing far enough east to smell the Thames when it turns foul, or to see the streets narrow into crooked alleys. You've heard of those places, of course: Whitechapel, Bethnal Green, Spitalfields. The words sit in the mouth like pepper, too sharp, too common to say at table. You might, if pressed, admit to having seen a slum tour. The East End in daylight, with a respectable guide to point out the sights like curiosities in a museum, a workhouse, a ragged school, perhaps a lodging house where you were instructed not to touch anything. Then back into the carriage before the real business of the streets began, the trading of gin for wages, the desperate bargaining for beds in common lodging houses. Those, you are told, are not sights fit for a lady. Switch skins. You're in the East End now. Boots worn thin, jacket smelling faintly of smoke because there's always a fire somewhere, either in a grate if you're lucky, or in a barrel on a street corner if you're not. You've never seen the inside of a West End ballroom, but you've pieced together a picture from the women who work there as cleaners or laundresses. They tell you of ceilings so high your voice comes back to you, of floors polished so smooth you could see your reflection between the candle flames. They talk of gowns that require their own petticoat armies, of music that plays for hours, of food that is served in courses you can't quite imagine, one after the other, as if hunger were something that could be coaxed into surrender. But you have never been invited to stand beneath those chandeliers. In fact, you've never seen a chandelier outside a shop window. Your nights are spent in rooms with ceilings low enough to touch, where the air feels heavier the longer you stay inside. The idea of dancing for hours is laughable. You walk enough in the day to make your feet ache, and your evenings are for resting, not waltzing. The separation is physical. Yes, miles of street between Mayfair and Shoreditch, but it is also mental, stitched into the way you think about the city. When you are rich, you imagine the East End as a place apart, as foreign as the furthest colony. You might give to a charity that sends Bibles to the poor, but you'd never go to see how they're received. When you are poor, the West End is a kind of theater set, too perfect to be real, too guarded to get close to. You might carry parcels there for work, but you leave as soon as you're paid, aware of the stares you collect just by being out of place. Every now and then, the worlds touch, but only at the edges. A lady might pass a flower girl on the steps of the opera house, drop a coin into her hand without looking too closely at the dirt under her nails. A costermonger might deliver fruit to a wealthy household, catching only the briefest glimpse of a breakfast room before the door closes again. These moments are as close as you'll get to crossing over, and it's not just manners that keep you apart, it's fear. The rich fear disease, theft, moral contagion. The poor fear authority, the police who seem to patrol more diligently at the borders than within their own streets. Each side keeps to itself not because the city demands it, but because centuries of habit have made the boundaries feel as solid as brick. On a map, the distance between your lives might be a few inches. In reality, it's years of life expectancy. In Belgravia, you can expect to live into your 50s or 60s. In Whitechapel, you're lucky to see 40. A baby born in a West End townhouse is wrapped in lace, christened in silver, and placed in a cradle in a warm nursery. A baby born in a tenement might share its first bed with siblings and cousins, wrapped in whatever scraps are available, its cries competing with the noise from the street outside. The tragedy is not that the worlds are different. It's that neither side truly sees the other. The wealthy imagine the poor as a problem to be solved or pitied, never as individuals with stories, talents, and private joys. The poor imagine the rich as cold and untouchable, their lives as effortless as their clothes. Both images are incomplete, but without crossing the invisible line, there's no way to correct them. The ballrooms remain closed to those without titles or invitations. The rookeries remain closed to those without the stomach for them. The same fog curls over both ends of the city at night, but it hides more than it reveals, and perhaps that's how the Victorians preferred it. Ignorance, after all, is a kind of comfort. If the rich never see the slums, they never have to reckon with the conditions that keep their servants cheap and their markets stocked. If the poor never see the ballrooms, they never have to reckon with just how far away that life really is. So you go on, each in your own half of London. You hear the same church bells, but from different pews. You walk the same streets, but never in the same direction. And you live and die without ever knowing what the other side looks like when it's not lit up or dressed up for show. The city exhales as night deepens. In one London, you're standing in a parlor lit by the steady glow of gas lamps, the scent of coal smoke curling gently beneath the heavier perfume of beeswax and polished wood. The fire is banked high, the brass fender gleaming. Outside, the fog has closed in, but you're not cold. You're never cold. You sink into a deep chair upholstered in something that would be ruined instantly if ever it set foot in the East End, and you let the sound of the mantel clock fill the spaces between sentences. Someone brings tea, or perhaps a final glass of port. There's no hurry. Bed will be warm, with a hot water bottle already tucked beneath the counterpane. The world feels small and contained, with the night shut firmly out. And in the other London, the one you might never set eyes on, the night has teeth. The wind slides under doors that don't quite close, rattles thin panes, and drags the damp right into the bones. The blankets, if you have any, are more whole than cloth. You share them with whoever else lives in your one-room world, family, lodgers, or both. The street noise seeps in because walls here are not for keeping sound out. Somewhere down the alley, a baby cries. Somewhere else, a man coughs and doesn't stop. Your breath leaves a little cloud in the dark. You sleep light because the cold won't let you sink too deep, and because the night is not always kind. The two Londons lie side by side, stitched together on the same map, but divided by more than distance. Here, birth decides how you end your day as much as it decided how you began it. Geography shapes comfort. Class dictates safety. You might pass each other in the street tomorrow without a word, both certain you understand the world, and both entirely wrong about the other half of it. You've now lived a full day in two worlds that existed side by side and almost never touched. If you don't want that history forgotten, you know what to do.